Marc Polymeropoulos, a former senior intelligence service officer at the CIA, says it's up to the Republican Party to de-radicalize their own base. No one else can do it for them. I'm Yasmin Khan with the breakdown, and Polymeropoulos wrote an opinion piece for NBC earlier this week in which he described his experience countering terrorism and radicalization in the Middle East. He said, quote, "The battle we engaged in with international terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda wasn't just with their legions of foot soldiers, but with their highly effective propaganda arms as well. The US and the Allies considered those propagandists fundamental cogs in a terror group's machinery, and just as culpable as any other terrorist. So we held them accountable when innocent civilians were killed." Of course, it's easy to understand the rationale behind why propagandists would be viewed as just as threatening as actual terrorists. Terrorists aren't born in a void, they come from somewhere. They're angry at something or someone, and they're looking for a target to direct that anger. Propagandists aim to give people that target, and propagandists feed that anger. Radicalization happens when anger feels justified, when their own lived experiences feel unjust, and when widespread acts of violence feel revolutionary. And to that point, Polymeropoulos calls attention not only to the increase of politically motivated violence that we've been seeing, but to one party's reluctance to denounce it. In fact, we've been seeing the opposite of denouncement. We've seen prominent figures on the right, including elected officials, encourage, incite, and celebrate violence against their political opponents.
I want to stop for a minute and listen. Speaker Pelosi's husband, they had a break-in last night in their house, and he was assaulted. There's no room for violence anywhere, but we're going to send her back to be with him in California. That's what we're going to go do. That's what we're going to go do.
We saw it back before Trump was even elected. At a 2015 rally, Trump said that his protesters should have been, quote, roughed up. In 2020, an ABC News report cited 54 cases in which Trump's name was invoked in connection with political violence. I don't need to get into the January 6th riot, or the fact that there was a gallows there for the vice president, or the fact that the lives of our entire Congress were under threat that day. And while critics of people like Polymeropoulos will argue that the left can also get violent from time to time, it's hard to build a case against the left as an institution. Individuals are one thing, but left-wing leaders don't go on Twitter and celebrate things like an assassination attempt on the Speaker of the House that left her husband in the hospital. And they certainly don't do things like that without retribution from their own colleagues and supporters. Just yesterday, here in Houston, Senator Ted Cruz got booed at, rightfully so, for inserting himself in our Astros victory parade. One guy in the crowd threw a beer at Cruz and hit him, which led to the man's arrest. He may be facing assault charges, but throwing a beer at someone is hardly the same as breaking into someone's house and attacking them with deadly force. And as much as no one likes Ted Cruz, he would be within his rights to press charges against the guy should he choose to do so. But following the actually deadly attack on Speaker Pelosi's husband, prominent Republicans, including Trump's son, got on Twitter and other media platforms to make fun of the victim, to celebrate the attack and the attacker, and to offer conspiracy theories surrounding the attack that demonized and slandered the victim. While a select few Republicans spoke out against all of it, it wasn't nearly enough to dissuade the more radical members of the party from engaging in further acts of violence, nor was it enough to counter the overwhelming rhetoric of the party. That hateful and violent rhetoric has, in many ways, come to define the party itself. While the majority of Republicans might not agree that violence is the best way forward, they're choosing to look the other way and cover their ears rather than to take their party back from its more radical members. Polymeropoulos cited a startling figure in his piece. According to a recent poll, nearly 1 in 3 Republicans believe that violence is necessary in order to save America from whatever it is that they believe it needs to be saved from. Comparably, only 11% of Democrats held the same belief, a figure that Polymeropoulos recognizes as still being too high for comfort, but 11% versus 33% is a staggering disparity. In an appearance on today's episode of MSNBC's Morning Joe, Polymeropoulos revealed that since his article was published on NBCNews.com, the propaganda machine turned on him via Fox News, making the false and deliberately misleading accusation that the author was advocating for the use of CIA terrorism measures against conservatives. So we talk a lot about fear-mongering, and we talk a lot about how fear can be a useful tool in any effort to mobilize a base. At what point do we, the non-governmental private citizens of this country, draw a line between an appropriate level of concern for what may or may not happen if and when certain ideologies gain traction and full-on radicalization? The point should be at violence. And for most of us, it still is. Most of us aren't trying to be the next Guy Fawkes. Most of us aren't trying to attack leaders in their homes with weapons. And most of us aren't even throwing our beers at Ted Cruz. But not enough of us are speaking out against the violence that we've already seen. And unless that happens, the violence-inducing rhetoric will continue. Not only that, but it will escalate, and more will become radicalized. More will begin to see violence as normalcy or a means to an end. More will come to view themselves as revolutionaries akin to the colonial rebels of the 18th century, a sentiment that we've already seen expressed from some on the right. And as Polymeropoulos expressed, and I have to agree with him on this, it can't come from me, it can't come from anyone remotely associated with the left. It has to come from the Republicans, and it has to come from Fox News. It has to come from their own leaders. They were the ones who created this mess, and they are the ones who need to fix it. All right, that's it for me. Please like and subscribe if you got anything out of this content, and be sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok.